Vivid verses.
The town of Fox Grove sits in a shallow valley between two ridge lines in the inland part of the state, far enough from the coast that summer arrives late and leaves without ceremony. The streets are wide and unhurried. The Old Mill district along Carver Creek has been converted into wine bars and design studios. Rent is reasonable if you know which landlords don't update their listings online, and I did, because I had lived here long enough to know almost everything worth knowing about the place. My apartment was on the third floor of a building called the Pellerin, a converted textile warehouse with original brick walls and windows the size of doorways. I had the corner unit. Morning light came through from the east, and I had arranged my desk to catch it. I worked from home 3 days a week as a systems analyst for a logistics company called Farrowbridge Consulting, and on those days I was up before 6, coffee made, desk cleared, thinking done before the rest of the building stirred. The other 2 days I drove 15 minutes to the company's regional office on Aldwick Road. I'm telling you this because the details matter. The rhythm of a life is its most honest autobiography, and mine at the time this story takes place was steady, deliberate. I had designed it that way after a period in my late 20s when I had not been deliberate about anything, and I had paid the price for that in ways I will not enumerate here. Suffice to say, I had learned what it cost to drift. I had been seeing Petra for about 8 months when things began to shift. Petra Voss. She was a landscape architect who worked for a firm called Greenline Studio on the north end of Carver Creek, and she was talented in the specific way that people who have both taste and technical knowledge are talented. She could make something beautiful and also explain exactly why it was beautiful. I admired that. We had met at a dinner party at our mutual friend Rowan's place. Rowan Hale, who taught urban planning at the local college and threw dinner parties that were actually good, meaning the food was decent and nobody tried too hard. Petra and I had talked for 3 hours without noticing the time. For the first several months, we were well matched. We did not crowd each other. She had her work, I had mine. We had 2 or 3 evenings a week together and occasional weekends. I cooked. She was better at choosing wine. We argued about things worth arguing about: city planning policy, whether a particular novel deserved its reputation, and let the rest alone. I noticed the first thing in March. We had been at a small get-together at a colleague of hers named Odette's apartment, Odette Bruin, who was warm and laughed too loudly and made everyone feel welcome. And I had stepped outside onto the narrow balcony to take a call from my brother, who was dealing with some property paperwork and needed a question answered. The call lasted about 12 minutes. When I came back in, Petra was in conversation with Odette's husband, a contractor named Fergus, and she looked at me with an expression I would describe as relief that had been quickly rearranged into neutrality. I filed it. On the drive home, she asked who I had called. I told her. She said nothing else, and I did not press it, but I noticed that she had asked. The question itself was not unusual. The speed of it was. The thing about a pattern is that you cannot see it until you have enough data points. And the problem with gathering data points on someone you're close to is that each individual point, observed in isolation, is entirely explainable. A question asked quickly. A phone left face down on the table when it hadn't been before. A slight lag before a response, as if something needed to be closed first. I am not a suspicious person by nature. Suspicion is expensive and imprecise. But I am an analyst, and analysis is not suspicion. It is observation followed by hypothesis followed by testing. By mid-April, I had enough observations to form a hypothesis. Petra had begun mentioning things I had not told her. Small things, said casually, dropped into conversation so naturally that I might not have caught them if I hadn't been paying attention. She mentioned that I had apparently been working late a lot on a specific day the previous week. I had not mentioned working late to her. She referenced a message my colleague Thea had sent me about a project timeline. I had not told Petra about Thea's message or the project. When I asked, as lightly as I could manage, how she knew about that, she said she must have overheard me on the phone. I had not been on the phone about it in her presence. The hypothesis formed clearly. She was reading my messages. I did not react. Reacting would have told her she had been discovered and given her time to prepare. Instead, I began, quietly and methodically, to understand the extent of it. I reviewed what I could review from my own end. I checked the access logs on my Faro Bridge account. My company-issued tablet was sometimes on the kitchen counter when she was at my apartment, and the session history showed a brief access at 11:47 on a Thursday evening 2 weeks ago. I had been asleep by 10 that night. I checked the location history on my phone through the Share Map app we had set up months ago when we'd driven separately to a hiking trail and needed to find each other. That feature was still active. I had not thought about it in months. I looked at my email. My personal account, the one tied to my phone, was logged in on my laptop, which I kept open on the kitchen counter when I worked from home. She had been to my apartment 4 times in the past 3 weeks. I could not prove she had opened it, but the hypothesis was now less a hypothesis and more a ledger. I thought about what she had done with the information. Nothing dramatic had come of it. No accusations, no confrontations. She had been using it to track me, not to catch me at anything specific because there was nothing specific to catch. What she had found, if she had found anything, was a man who did his work, talked to his brother, corresponded with colleagues, and occasionally texted friends about plans for dinner. The question was not what she had found. The question was what kind of person goes looking. I gave it a week. I continued to behave exactly as I had before because I had nothing to change. I was not adjusting my behavior to avoid detection. I had nothing to hide, which is different from having nothing she might misinterpret if she were looking for misinterpretation. I wanted to be certain before I did anything. By the end of the week, I was certain. There's a bar in Foxgrove called Sable and Cord that I had been going to for years before I met Petra. It is in the Old Mill District, low-lit and unhurried. The kind of place where you can have a real conversation because the music is not trying to compete with it. I went there on a Friday evening with my friend Clement Park, who was a civil engineer and one of the few people I have ever trusted to give me an unvarnished read. Clement is a careful thinker, which is why I called him, and not someone warmer. I did not need warmth right now. I needed someone who would tell me if I was reading the situation incorrectly. We sat at the high table in the back corner with 2 glasses of Terravale Red, a local label that had been making a reasonable Syrah for the past few years, and I laid out what I had found. Not emotionally, just the data, the session log, the location app, the references to things she shouldn't have known. Clement listened without interrupting, which is his best quality. When I finished, he turned his glass slowly on the table. "Have you considered," he said, "that there might be an innocent explanation?" "I have," I said. "For any single item, yes. For the pattern, no." He nodded once. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell her I know," I said. "But not yet. I want to understand what I'm dealing with first." "What more do you need to understand?" "I need to know if she's going to lie when I raise it, or if she's going to justify it. Those are 2 different things, and they require 2 different responses." Clement looked at me over the rim of his glass. "Most people would have already confronted her." "Most people react," I said. "I'd rather respond." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're misreading it. The session log alone would be enough for me." That was enough. I didn't need vindication. I had the evidence, but it was useful to have a second set of eyes confirm that I wasn't constructing something out of anxiety. Anxiety was not a variable I usually had to account for, but when you're close to someone it is worth checking. I drove home through Foxgrove's quiet Friday streets, past the lit windows of the restaurants on Carver Creek and the dark doorways of the studios, and I thought about trust, not about how it felt to have it broken. That was a feeling I would deal with in my own time, privately, but about the mechanics of it. Trust is an architecture. It is not built from the absence of secrets. Everyone has things they have not shared, preferences they have not explained, parts of their history they have elected not to air. That is not hiding. That is being a person. Trust is built from the decision not to go looking because you have extended the other person the dignity of belief. Petra had gone looking. Whatever she had told herself to justify it, she had gone looking, and she had done it without my knowledge, and she had done it more than once. I pulled into the Pellerin's parking structure and sat in the car for a moment after I turned off the engine. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was something more like the quiet finality of a door closing. Not slammed, just shut. She came over on Sunday. She brought pastries from a place called Brisket and Bloom on the main strip, which had recently added a bakery section and was doing it well. We made coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, and she talked about a project she was working on, a corporate courtyard renovation for a pharmaceutical campus outside town. And I listened and asked questions and was completely present because that is how I operate. Whatever I was planning to say, it had not been said yet. And until it was said, I would not be performing a version of myself shaped by what was coming. At some point, she reached across the counter and picked up my phone to look at a photo she had sent me the previous week, a planting layout she had sketched for the courtyard, and I watched her navigate to the photo app, find the image, and set the phone back down. She had done it naturally without asking. She had done it as someone who had grown accustomed to having access. There it is, I thought. Not guilt. Habit. That was the tell. The session log could theoretically have been a mistake, a mistap in the dark. The references to things she shouldn't have known could theoretically have been coincidence. But the ease with which she moved through my phone, that was a behavior pattern, and behavior patterns do not form overnight. I poured myself more coffee and thought about the best way to begin. Not tonight. I needed the right conditions, not staged, not formal, but controlled enough that the conversation would go where it needed to go without being derailed by setting or timing. I wanted us to be alone. I wanted it to be a time when neither of us was about to leave for anything. I wanted, most importantly, to have said everything I planned to say before she had a chance to redirect the conversation, because I had by now developed a fairly clear picture of what her redirection would look like, and I did not intend to follow it. I set the date in my mind, Wednesday evening. She was coming over for dinner. I would cook, we would eat, and after dinner, in the living room with the kitchen cleaned and no remaining practical tasks to retreat to, I would raise it. I spent Sunday evening rereading the session logs I had screenshotted. I was not building a case for a tribunal. I was not interested in winning a debate. I was preparing myself to speak clearly because I had learned that clarity under pressure requires preparation, and because this was not a situation where I could afford to be vague. I made pasta, a straightforward cacio e pepe with good Parmesan I had bought from the market on Aldwych, a small specialty food counter called Torlo's that did its own aged cheeses. Nothing elaborate. I was not trying to set an atmosphere. I was making dinner because it was dinner time. We ate. She talked about a revision her clients had requested on the courtyard project. They wanted a water feature she thought was wrong for the space. And I had a genuine opinion about it, which I shared. The conversation was real. I want to be clear about that. Whatever I was planning to raise, it did not corrupt the dinner because I did not let it. Compartmentalizing is not suppression. It is basic self-management. After dinner, I washed the dishes while she sat at the counter on her phone, and when everything was clean, I dried my hands and said, "Come sit with me for a minute." She looked up. Something in the flatness of my tone, not cold, just level, registered with her. I could see it. She set her phone down and followed me to the living room. We sat, her on the sofa, me in the chair across from it. Normal enough geometry, not adversarial. I said, "I want to talk about something," and I want to do it without it becoming an argument because I'm not interested in arguing. I'm interested in being direct. She had assumed a careful expression, open, slightly concerned, the expression of someone who is prepared to be sympathetic to a problem they do not yet know is about them. All right, she said. I know you've been reading my messages, I said. My texts, my emails. I know you've been checking my location through the shared app. I know this because I have the session logs for my accounts, and because you've referenced information on at least 3 separate occasions that you could not have known without having read it. I watched her face go through several things in sequence. First, the brief, almost involuntary look of someone caught. Then, the recalibration, the adjustment from that first look to something more composed. Then, the decision about which direction to go. She went in a direction I had anticipated. I've been worried, she said. You've been distant lately, and That's not what I asked, I said calmly. I didn't ask why. I said I know you've been doing it, and I wanted you to know that I know. A pause. I wasn't trying to spy on you, she said. I was scared. Scared. I noted the word. Not apologetic. Not accountable. Scared, which recentered the conversation on her emotional state rather than her actions. Scared of what, specifically? I said. She stopped. Tried again. I don't know. Something fell off. What fell off? She didn't answer immediately, and in the silence I could see her working through it, trying to find the version of events that made her the protagonist of a fear rather than the agent of a violation. I just needed to know, she said finally. I'll let that sit for a moment. Then I said, as evenly as I'd said everything else, that's the same thing in different language. You went through my accounts because you wanted to. The reason you gave yourself doesn't change what you did. I didn't find anything, she said. The implication was clear. I know you didn't, I said, because there wasn't anything to find. But that isn't the point, and I think you know it isn't the point. She straightened slightly. I saw the shift from the soft defensive posture to something more prepared. If you had nothing to hide, she said, it wouldn't matter. I had known that was coming. Not those exact words, but that exact move, the reframe that converts surveillance into irrelevance, that turns violation into a non-event by pointing to what wasn't found. It is a specific kind of logic, and it requires a specific answer. Trust isn't about having nothing to hide, I said. You violated mine. We're done. She stared at me. I'd said it without heat, and I meant every part of it. And the absence of heat was not performance. It was genuine because I had arrived at this conclusion 4 days ago and had had time to settle into it. The decision was not being made in this room. It had been made in the parking structure of the Pellerin on a Friday night. What was happening here was just the announcement of it. You're ending things over this, she said. Not quite a question. I'm ending things because of what it reveals, I said. Not because of the individual acts. Because of what they tell me about how you understand this relationship. I made a mistake, she said. I know that. I'm telling you that. She had not told me that. She had said she was scared, and she had argued that what she found absolved her. I did not say this aloud. I simply noted the gap between what she had said and what she was now claiming to have said, and I let it stand there unaddressed. I hear you, I said, but we are still done. You're not even going to try to... No, I said, not cutting her off, just answering the question she was in the middle of asking. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, collected her jacket from the hook by the door, picked up her bag, and left. She did not slam the door. She closed it with a kind of controlled pressure that communicated what a slam would have without being one. I sat in the chair for a while after she left. The apartment was the same as it always was. The evening light was falling across the brick in the same long planes it always did at this time of year. I was not hollowed out. I was not buoyant. I was approximately what I usually was, which is to say, present and clear in watching what came next. Rowan Hale called me on Thursday. I picked up because I always picked up for Rowan, who was one of those people who only called when there was a reason. She talked to you, I said. Last night, he said. I didn't want to wade into it, but she asked me to call you. She asked you to call me, or she told you what happened and you decided to call me. A pause. Bit of both, he admitted. Are you all right? Yes. She's pretty upset. I expect so. Another pause. Rowan was choosing his words, which he did carefully when the subject was sensitive. She says you ended it very suddenly. It wasn't sudden, I said. I gave it a week before I raised it and another several days before I acted on it. What she experienced as sudden was the conclusion of something I had been working through for a while. She says she made a mistake. She made a series of them. I said, over several weeks. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. Right. He was quiet for a moment. She said something about that you had nothing to hide, so why does it matter? I know, I said. She said that to me too. And I disagree with the premise, I said. Privacy isn't guilt. Trust isn't surveillance's inverse. She was going through my accounts because she wanted information she felt entitled to gather unilaterally. That tells me something about how she sees the relationship, and that thing is something I can't rebuild from. Rowan was quiet for a longer moment this time. That's very clear thinking for someone who just ended an 8-month relationship. It was clear by Friday, I said. I've had time. I'm not going to try to change your mind, he said. I just wanted to hear you say it out loud, honestly, so I knew it wasn't something that got away from you in the heat of the moment. It wasn't. All right, he said. I'll tell her I called. Tell her it didn't change anything, I said. Not harshly, just accurately. He said he would, and we said goodbye, and I went back to the work I had been doing, which was a logistics model for a Faro bridge client in the northern part of the state, and I worked on it steadily until early evening. I ran into Odette Bruin at Torlo's on Saturday morning. She was at the cheese counter when I came in, and there was a moment of visible uncertainty on her face before she decided to say hello, which I appreciated. Avoiding people is a social cost I have never understood. I heard about you and Petra, she said. I'm sorry. Thank you, I said. She looked at me in the way people look at you when they want to offer something but aren't sure what denominations you accept. Are you doing all right? I am, I said. Truly. She's been. Odette stopped. I won't editorialize. You can, I said. I won't hold it against you. She glanced at the counter, then back at me. She's been telling people that you ended it very coldly, without giving her a chance. There it is. Not unexpected, but useful to have confirmed. The narrative Petra was circulating positioned my deliberateness as coldness, and my clarity as a denial of process. It was an effective reframe. It moved the conversation from what she had done to how I had responded to it, which put the behavior under examination on my side of the ledger. What do you think? I asked Odette, not combatively, just curiously. She took a moment. Honestly, I think she was always a little anxious about you. Not because of anything you did. She just, I don't know. She kept waiting for something to be wrong. And when she couldn't find anything wrong, she kept looking, I said. Odette was quiet for a moment. She told me she checked your phone. Not the rest of it, but she mentioned the phone. I know, I said. She knows I know. Did you talk about it? Yes. And then I ended it. Just like that. It wasn't just like that, I said. It was 8 months and a pattern of behavior and a conversation and a decision. What she's calling just like that is the part she was present for. Odette looked at me with an expression that was hard to categorize, something between respect and something more complicated. For what it's worth, she said, I think I'd have done the same. I bought my cheese and we said goodbye warmly, which I think surprised her. I liked Odette. What had happened between me and Petra was not a reason to lose that. There's a trail that runs along the eastern ridgeline above Foxgrove. Not a formal park trail, just a maintained footpath that the town has never quite decided what to do with. I had been running it for 3 years. 6 miles, enough elevation to require attention, enough view to justify it. I went on Sunday morning as I always did, starting from the Pellerin at 6:15. The trail required the kind of focused, physical attention that empties the mind of everything that is not immediately relevant. I had noticed years ago that I made my best decisions in the day following a long run. Not because the run gave me answers, but because it had scraped out the noise. I ran the loop in 54 minutes, which was slightly faster than my average, and walked the last quarter mile back to the building cooling down. The town was still quiet. The Mill District reflected weak, morning sun off the creek. 2 cyclists passed on Carver Street without looking up. I had, in the week since Wednesday's conversation, thought carefully about whether I had done the right thing. Not in the sense of second-guessing. The decision was the decision, but in the sense of examining it for integrity. Had I been fair? Had I been honest? Had I acted from a clear read of the situation, or from something less clean? The answers, reviewed in the methodical way I reviewed most things, were yes, yes, and the former. She had violated my privacy repeatedly over several weeks. When I raised it, she had not apologized. She had explained her fear, and then, when pressed, had attempted to use the absence of incriminating evidence as a retroactive justification for her actions. She had asked me to accept surveillance on the grounds that I had nothing to hide, which requires agreeing that the right to privacy depends on what is found, rather than being unconditional. I did not agree with that. I did not agree with it in principle, and I did not agree with it as applied to my own life. The relationship had revealed a structural incompatibility, and I had responded to that revelation. There was nothing to revise. What I did not do, and I want to be clear about this, was tell the story everywhere I could. I told Clement because I needed a second opinion before I acted. I told Rowan because he called, and because I respected him enough to be direct. I said what I needed to say to Odette because she raised it directly and deserved a real answer. Beyond that, the details of what Petra had done were not something I distributed. Not because I was protecting her, she had not earned that, but because broadcasting it served no purpose I valued. I had not ended the relationship to punish her. I had ended it because it was the correct thing to do. Those are different motivations, and they produce different behaviors. What Petra chose to say or not say was her concern. If she told a version of events that made me the cold one, fine. People who needed to know more would ask, and I would answer them honestly, and the ones who didn't ask either didn't need to know or had already made up their minds. I could not control the story. I could only be consistent in the actual story. About 2 weeks after the conversation with Petra, Clement and I were back at Sable and Cord. Different seats this time, by the window, because the evening was still enough that we could have them open without the noise of the street competing with us. Has she reached out? He asked. Once, I said. A text. She said she wanted to talk when I was ready. Are you going to respond? Eventually, I said. Not yet. Not because I'm punishing her. I just have nothing to say right now that I didn't already say. He nodded. The crowd at Odette's place. Some of them are asking questions. I know, I said. Odette told me. And you're not. No, I said. I'm not going to run a counter-campaign. If people ask me directly, I'll tell them the truth. If they don't ask, it's not my job to inform them. Clement turned his glass. The thing about that approach is that it requires you to be comfortable with people having incomplete information. Yes, I said. I am. Some people aren't, he said. It drives them crazy. I know, I said. That's why it works. He looked at me. What works? Not playing, I said. She needs the story to be about my coldness because the alternative is a story about her behavior. If I engage with the coldness narrative, if I defend myself against it, protest it, try to correct it, then I've accepted that the story is about my behavior. If I don't engage, the narrative has nothing to push against, and eventually it collapses under its own weight. That assumes people are paying close enough attention, he said. The people whose opinions I care about are, I said, and the ones who aren't. Their opinions don't shape anything real in my life. He was quiet for a moment. You're very composed about this. I was hurt, I said. Not angrily, but it hurt. She had access to things I didn't give her access to, and she used it to, not to find anything, but to keep looking. That's its own kind of betrayal. You don't need to find a thing you're afraid of to do damage. The looking is enough. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that's right. We sat there for a while longer, talking about other things, his current project, a drainage system for a new residential development east of town, an article we'd both read about transit infrastructure. And at some point the conversation shifted entirely away from Petra and into the ordinary territory of two people who have known each other for a long time and do not need to maintain a subject to be comfortable in each other's company. That, too, was a kind of answer. A month after ending it, I rearranged the desk. Not dramatically, just rotated it 90 degrees so that it faced the window directly rather than catching the light at an angle. I've been thinking about doing it for a year. The light is better this way. I ran into Petra once at the Aldwick Road Market, 6 weeks after everything. We said hello. She looked well. I did not search her expression for meaning because I was not looking for anything, and the discipline of not looking is, it turns out, the same skill whether you're applying it to a person or to your own desire to be vindicated. She had sent the text she mentioned she would send. I responded to it about 3 weeks after I received it. I said, I appreciate you reaching out. I don't have anything to add to what I said. I wish you well. She didn't reply, and I didn't expect her to. The session logs are still on my phone, archived in a folder I have not opened since the week I compiled them. I kept them not as evidence, not as a record of grievance, but as data. You keep data. That is how you learn things. What I learned, that the people who violate privacy almost always do so from the conviction that their anxiety entitles them to certainty, and that certainty is not something another person can give you, no matter how transparent they are. You can give someone full access to everything you have ever done or said or thought, and if the problem is their anxiety, they will find something to misread. The surveillance is not looking for facts. It is looking for permission to keep looking. The other thing I learned, or perhaps confirmed, is that the only way to respond to that kind of manipulation is to decline to be manipulated by it. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just know, this is not how I participate. This is not a game I will play. Fox Grove in April has a specific quality of light in the evenings. Pale gold, horizontal, catching the brick of the mill buildings and turning them amber for about 40 minutes before the sun drops behind the western ridge. I notice it from my desk now, face on, which I could not do before the rearrangement. The work is still steady. Clement and I still go to Sable and Cord on Friday nights when both of us are free. Rowan still throws dinner parties that are actually good. The door closed, and the room is the same room. That is enough.
Thanks for listening.